Hey, what's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode. This week, we're going into deeper dive into tree supports, mini supports, and what I like to refer to as mini trees. Stay tuned. This wonderful figure here you see, this model is actually a new one. We just acquired a license from GAZ Minis, and this is one of the ones from February. This is an Oni. I believe this is a Oni Spire Hunter. Really cool looking model. Nice big gun there. And what we're going to focus on today is we're going to focus on some of the finer little details there, like that little finger pointing up to the sky, as well as some other fine points. We're going to talk about how we kind of get into the whole, working with trees and anchoring those trees and creating anchor points. And we're going to get into another character as well, where we talk about different aspects of that as well. And both of the models we're showcasing today are from GAZ Minis. So shout out to GAZ. We do love GAZ's work. Absolutely cannot wait to see more. Super excited. So stay tuned. We got some more coming. This episode is going to be really interesting. Now, the orientation you're looking at here is pretty much just what we've decided for these parts. There are some pre-supported versions of these models, but as you can see, I've upscaled them. The original sizes, I believe, are 32 millimeter and 75 millimeter, something like that. And so we brought this up, I think, to about 250% scale, maybe 200, maybe 300% scale. It might actually be a little bigger. Because, first of all, I love the sculpts. They're just beautiful. Making them small, you can't see all the great details that are in there. So really want to kind of focus on that. Now, as we get into the whole tree support concepts, I want to kind of focus on, again, we're talking about this finger. This finger's there's frailty there because if you look at it, it's about the width of one of my light supports. And that's pretty thin. So you're talking about nothing that's a bit, maybe a bit thicker than 1.22 millimeters, which is enough for you to snap it off pretty easy. What you want to do is you want to start building up a base from the armpit. And we're going to start by creating some small trees here in the armpit. As you know, the command to create a tree branch there as you're creating one is you're going to hold down the Alt key as you as you hover over the model. You're going to see your support. You're going to hold down the Alt key, and that's going to allow you to create a tree branch. Of course, alternately, you can go back to the original parent branch and or trunk as it will be, and you can make that one thicker, and then you can even go back down and, like I'm doing here, create tiny little mini trees at the very top, where you're going to have a little mini cluster of mini supports at the very tip, where the tip of that tree touches the model. Now, the focus here is going to have flexibility. When you use mini supports have a little bit more of a flexibility before they snap. Because they're so small, they seem to be a little bit less prone to just snapping. They're not super strong, so you can't hold a lot with them, but if you use a bunch of them in little clusters or trees, as I do, at the tops of your supports, you can create extra durability at the tips of your support without really creating any kind of points of damage on the model. And so as you see what I'm doing here, I'm creating all these little mini points that are connecting to the main points just to strengthen them off. And you have so much more contact coverage there just because of those mini supports. They don't have to be massive. They don't have to be all over the place. It just has to be enough to get you deeper coverage. And now you have so much more pixel coverage there when you're doing those layers during your print. So again, the mini trees, the tree support. Now, tree supports help in a different way. Tree supports help because they help, from you avoid clustering on the bottom of your models. And I'm guilty of this. I don't often remember to go, I should tree these supports. Because I use a really light support, they tend to be really easy to remove anyway, and they don't cluster very hard. But when you do tend to use heavier or medium-sized supports, you run into clustering issues where you're going to get like these really thick trunks of support that are going to run into each other. And so instead, the way to do this is to essentially run off tree branches into your trunks. And you have these areas where you have like, okay, you have like one bar that is sitting there, and then you have like, maybe 4 or 5 branches that are tipping off of that bar. And you, of course, can go back and make that bar stronger, but in most cases, it's not really hyper necessary to do so. The bracings and everything else will hold it all together for the most part, unless, of course, you're trying to pull off an impossible support with like hyper light, one tiny support with a bunch of tree tips, touching the item. That's probably not going to benefit you very much. So keep that in mind. There are times when not to do this, and there are times when to do this. You can create little tripod supports. That's a common way to do it. You can create, again, use your mini supports to balance out and support the tips. This is a great way to give yourself extra pull at the site of contact. And again, mini supports don't create much damage at all. You really just wind up with a little tiny flake of support that's left over once you pull that off. And so they're very negligible as far as any damage is concerned. They're great to use. You can use tons of them. And instead of using a ton of supports, you can use a ton of those connected to the support tips that you're using. And essentially you wind up with clusters of mini trees rather than having just giant farms of support trunks at the bottom of your print. Now we're going to go ahead and finish this one up as pretty much this is the same technique I'm going to use throughout the entire observation here with this particular model. I create a tip, I contact that to the model, and then I'm going to create mini support trees that are going to touch the tip of that particular support that I just created. It's either going to be 1 or 2 branches, maybe just 1 in some cases, where I'm just connecting a little bit extra just to give it an extra tug in order to help it along during the printing process. Remember, these mini supports aren't offering massive amount of structural integrity. They're only offering extra pull for the supports that they're connected to, which means that the support itself is getting a little bit of a boost or assistance per se in helping that area kind of print along. The mini support tips also lend a hand to the areas of the support that are kind of around wherever they're being, held, because now you have extra tips that are holding up material that you may not have had before. And the tip is the same size as whatever tip you're using for your particular support. So it's not like it's any less structural there. It's just the support itself is very, very, very thin because it's just a mini support. So again, I wouldn't support your entire model using them, but as you can see in the demonstration we're posing here, there's definitely a purpose for them. You can use them as a treeing support at the tips of your support. You can do multiple types of treeing. You can cluster the trees. You can draw your own bracings if you want, to create your own kind of vertical bracing system where you want to create more strength and angle for a particular object. And again, it all depends. You can go back and refine this 100 ways. There's no one way to support a particular type of print. But when you look at it, your goal is still going to be the same, and your workflow should still reflect that. You want ease of removal, you want less damage, and you want very high quality print with, again, ease of removal, no damage, and high quality. Those should be tenets that you kind of repeat in your mind over and over and over again. And, it's something that you'll kind of just get used to saying to yourself. It's like, I want to be able to make this easy on myself. I don't want to spend 30 minutes on one figurine removing all the little supports from all the tiny fragile parts because I had to put maybe either way too many supports or something far too heavy because, we're not understanding how to use the mini supports to our benefit and stuff like that. So as you see, again, with this particular demonstration, we're focusing on the hand, the arm, and the fingertip. I'm not going to support the entire model on either of these demonstrations just because you guys already know how to support a model. I don't think we're here to talk about that. But essentially, we're here to kind of go over the more refined areas, like, again, tree supporting. It's You can make it very, very intricate if you want. Again, I'm going to go over it again with one of the other models from GAZ, and we'll go over that in a little bit. I'll just let you guys finish up watching the rest of this supporting with the hand here, and we'll move on to the next model shortly. All right, and again, we're checking out a model from GAZ Minis, and this is one of the other models from the Oni pack. I believe this is the, I can't remember the character's name. Really cool looking characters. You can get these in the, safe for work and not safe for work editions. And this particular one, I've already started working on some of the island work, and as you see here, we've applied a little tripod down there on her leg. That is a type of tree. It's a small cluster tree, but it is a type of tree. A tree is anything that inhabits a trunk and either one or more branches. The mini trees are essentially just the tips that contact the tip on top. If you were to create a tree out of a mini and then create a bunch of branches that connect to that, I suppose that could work in a really limited capacity in small areas of a model. I don't have anything, for example, on that particular type for this video, but we are going to continue to discuss the usage of minis as well, because they do help. Now, in her scabbard back here, there's a lot of little points back there down at the bottom that I'm going to kind of go over as well, because in this particular one, I'm going to show you how the islands are kind of effective to kind of help you figure out where your, delicate bits are going to be. Islands are usually parts that are hanging off. In this case, it's the sword that's got a bunch of islands on it. So we're going to just put our main supports around the sword, which is going to allow it just to support itself a little bit. And as we see here, look at that. That island right there is right on a little line of detail. So I don't want to really do that. So I'm going to place the support a little bit further away. And then we're going to place the mini support that's going to connect from that actual island to the tip. And that's going to create a negligible amount of damage versus what an actual support tip, I think, will do. And I know a lot of people are going to argue, well, it's the same size. Yes, but it's got a lot less mass as far as when you pull it off. And the way I remove supports is I simply just pull them off. So it has a lot less chance of actually ripping detail apart when it does that. For those of you that use clippers, yeah, you probably don't need to worry about that much. You can just go in there and clip it off. But again, that's just something you're going to have to sand out. Versus the mini support is very, very little chance of it even sticking or or losing any detail at all. So I don't know. For me, less finishing means more fun. So I prefer to try to get it as simple as possible. Now, as again, we're just going to support the islands on this sword and just kind of like move our way up so I can kind of show you how you can use trees effectively as you build. And then we're going to show you kind of how we take the trees now, and I'm going to show you how to make an enhanced trunk on your tree, which is pretty obvious. I mean, all you're going to do is really increase the bar on the center trunk. Whereas, your tips and, are going to stay the same, but your bar is going to get a little thicker because the bar you want to be able to withstand a little bit more pressure because it's now holding up a bunch of tips. And especially on something flexible like a sword that might actually have a little bend to it. Now, this is a pretty thick sword, rather, and I don't think it's going to have a whole lot of issue bending. I've seen some really thin ones in the past that, you look at it and you go, okay, that's going to bend. More than likely when I cure this, it's probably going to warp a little bit. So, I kind of get used to what I'm looking at when it comes to that sort of stuff. And you go, all right, I kind of expect, this is going to look. This one, I didn't think it was going to do that. What I'm demonstrating here is how to use the tree supports to successfully support a long object like a sword without having to worry about pulling them off later and breaking the sword off. Because these supports are going to come off real easy. You're going to use some mini supports there in the middle, and that's going to make it super easy for everything to come off, and it's going to support this part just well enough that it's going to print real nice. So we're going to go through the rest of this in just a moment. Stay tuned. Anyways, you can see the workflow here is pretty similar to what we were doing on the arm. The only major difference here is as I'm kind of going through each piece of the blade, we're taking a look at how the minis need to be applied towards the bottom, and then I'm applying a tip, and then I'm going to apply some supports, and then we're going to move on. Now, as you see, and I'm taking my time kind of doing this aspect because when you support an item like this, you want it to print without warping. And I hear a lot of people talking about the items that they print warp. So I kind of, I looked more into this, and essentially it's got a lot to do with orientational angle, but it's got a lot to do with supporting as well. If the supporting isn't good or it's off, when the item like a sword especially, or something thin or wobbly or wavy, or something that has material on it that's going to be a little bit thinner, you're going to wind up getting a pull or peel force towards the FEP on the actual item. And then over time, with that having like hundreds of layers to print, it's going to bend and you're going to wind up with warping. Now, you can avoid this with heavier support techniques. You can avoid this by using clustering techniques, and you can avoid it by using some of the tree techniques that I'm showing you here. The way that I'm supporting the sword that this character is holding, using the tip length and style that I'm using here, using the trunk's length and bar that I'm using, you will get a good result out of this print. And this is upscale too. This isn't even the original size, which is again why I'm not using the pre-supported files that we get from the artist. Which again, I haven't used, so I cannot say if they work very well or not, and I won't say that they won't because I have no idea. I assume they do because this artist is actually widely acclaimed and a lot of folks like him. So, you know, again, I don't know. We don't use a lot of pre-supported files just for the sense of we like to be able to know how to remove our own supports. And when you work with pre-supported files, it's a mystery on how it was done sometimes unless you really take a close look at it. And I'd rather just do it myself. It gets me more intimate with the model and lets me understand the parts of it that I need to be aware, you know, are delicate, and where I need to, you know, focus my attention when I'm doing my support removal. Now, the way I'm demonstrating here, you see the straight, you know, row of supports across. This potentially could be enough, and you could probably go into the top there and you could just create your little support, mini support trees. But I'm going to create a couple of what we call just main support tripods. So you got little like support, these are trees, you know, you have your little 2 branches and then your main trunk. And then I'm going to make the trunk itself. I'm just going to take the diameter of the bar. I'm going to bring it up to a 1.44 just to make it thicker. But the tip is going to remain the same, and the other bits down there on the side are going to remain the same. But what that did was that made the bar beefier to maintain some more of the excess pull that those 2 additional supports on the side are going to be. So you can then repeat this process down the line, and you can even add more tips on top of that. So now we have 5 little tips there in one little area that honestly should be incredibly easy to just go boop and just pop right off, and they will offer a decent amount of support. So this is essentially a supporting supports, which is what I love about treeing. So treeing your supports is really good. If you play around with the concept, you'll see there's so many different ways to do this and to tree up your supports. It's a great way to do it. I love it personally. I think it's fantastic. And again, you know, like I said, you can repeat this process. You can have multiples of these trees where you have like, you know, 1 or 2 next to each other. And essentially that's 5 tips and then 5 more tips next to each other, all sitting at each other and with only 1 bar at the bottom each. So it gives you so much less to worry about on cleanup, such a lighter support usage on resin, but you're still offering your model a decent amount of support on top. Now again, you'll have to play around with what works best depending on what you're supporting, how it's being supported, and how heavy the particular object is, how big the particular object is. You know, these particular models, we're upscaling them. They're quite big at this state. You know, they're over, in most cases, over 10 centimeters rather than, you know, their common sizes that they come in. So we're talking about larger. We didn't hollow these either, so this is a solid figure. And so they can tend to be a bit heavier, and so, you know, you really want to, you know, again, use caution. And this is why you want to use your flexibility. You want to make sure that you apply your mini supports. And look, even now, even with those tripods, I'm still applying some extra mini supports there on the edges and on the inside to make sure that that is extra supported. Because again, this object, even as thick as it is, could still potentially warp or pancake or cause issues for the print. So again, you know, every object is super important to make sure that you maintain that. Now, once again, we're looking at a hand. And again, hands and fingers are always things that tend to be an issue, so this is actually quite a good topic to go over, I think. Now I'm using my light tips on these with your standard tip bars and nothing modified on the actual islands, and then I'm going to create some minis in there as well. And you'll see we're going to create some mini clusters and mini trees inside the hand too. Oh, and don't forget, as with any type of mini support, or even when you're using like the Alt hotkey to do your tree branches, you can actually draw a branch from one portion of the model to another, technically using the model to support itself. Now, a lot of folks don't like to do this because they say that it damages the quality of the model. I'll usually only do this if I absolutely have to, but as I'm doing here with the thumb and the finger, putting those mini supports between those fingers actually creates a nice little infrastructure there to help that hand have a little bit extra strength as it builds up. Also, another good reminder is you never want minis to go too long. Every once in a while I'll notice that Lychee will allow a mini to create itself really long, either through using the support painter or using its native click and add support system. And for whatever reason, these supports, mini supports as I rather, come out incredibly long and just would not really work. They're going to wind up like a stringy mess, more than likely, or just fail, and you're not going to wind up liking what you find later. Now, with the sword fully set up and done, I can move on to the scabbard and demonstrate some more methods in which how we can use mini supports to handle the jobs of supporting without costing too much detail loss or damage on the model, and supporting little things like the details on the scabbard. Now, for example, I pointed this out earlier, on the back of the scabbard there are these little tips here that kind of point down. They almost look like little spider legs coming out of the side of each bit of the scabbard on both the front and the back. Now, the only way to really avoid full damage to these, since each one of them happens to be an island as well, is to really use a support or mini support and try to stabilize them with something nearby. So for the ones that I found on the left side of the back, I was able to mini support them directly to the body of the model, and for the most part, that seemed okay with me. Now, I wasn't going to connect any huge supports or anything larger than a mini to these things, really, because I didn't think that they would do well with anything larger than just a mini tip. But, I mean, you could probably get away with using the light supports that I use, and it might, just cost you a little bit of sanding or something like that, where if any of the support tip is left behind. But usually the super lights that I use don't get left behind, so it's usually not an issue. Now, again, you can't use minis on everything because it just isn't going to support everything as well as it should. So you do need to remember to place anchors sometimes, and that is where placing your normal support comes in, or something slightly heavier like a medium, kind of like, and then you can kind of move up from there. So you can base that on what you need, and that will allow you to make the best judgment based on how your model's detail needs to come out. And keep in mind which direction it needs to face as well, because that's going to help you determine the best orientation as far as back to front. That's something I fight with all the time. And if it's not obvious which direction a figurine is supposed to face, you're sitting there going, okay, well, which is the most important side? And a lot of people, would say, well, it's the front, right, where you see the face. Not every time. Sometimes it's the focal point is different. But again, something you learn as you kind of go through and figure out, the ropes of this kind of stuff. Now, as you can see, what I'm doing here is creating some supports around these little bits, and then I'm just dragging out mini supports to them. This will be enough. These aren't super heavy parts that are going to be, dragging down the entire print. These are little tiny bits stuck to this sword scabbard as a little tiny bit of detail. So it's going to be quite simple as far as removing any sign of that ever being there. Anyway, guys, I'm not going to bore you with the rest of this one as we finish up all the rest of the islands here on this model. As you can see, using support trees, mini supports, and different types of support trees and mini support tree clusters can help you to minimize both your supporting effort, lessen your support use, which will lessen your resin usage, and also help you on your cleanup time because it's going to make your supporting that much cleaner, and heck, it's even going to make it better to look at, to be honest. Now, it's going to take you more time to now focus on this as you kind of work on supporting and using this tree method to support versus just working with single standard stock supporting where you're kind of just sticking a support wherever you need one. Now, keep in mind, both methods can be valid and do actually work. Treeing has its benefits because of the fact that it will minimize your efforts and it will minimize the usage of resin because you're going to minimize the amount of support stocks that you're using, or bars rather, and that's going to minimize the amount of resin overall. And now, again, you have to remember the trunk of your tree sometimes has to be a little bit stronger, especially if you're maintaining more weight or you're putting a lot of tips on it, like I demonstrated with the sword. So keep all of that in mind as you kind of go along, you know, the particular work that you're working on. So again, guys, thanks so much for watching. Hope this was an informative episode for everybody. We're going to cover more about treeing, mini trees, and more mini stuff as I do create some more of these masterclass episodes. Again, I appreciate y'all subscribing to the channel. We are definitely loving all this love and support that we were getting. We do appreciate that. If you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to ring the bell if you want notifications. And hey, hit that like button and leave us a comment. We'd love to hear from you. See y'all soon.